People only love my food when they are starving for 2 weeks straight, and I know that sounds ludicrous, but I'm starting to get known by this very reputation. I have always loved cooking, but ever since high school, I've been belittled and mocked for being such a terrible cook. I've read every cookbook and watched every cooking show, and I've always tried to excel at cooking, but unfortunately, I never really had the gift for it. You know, sometimes you do need the talent to begin with, to excel at something, and I do believe there are some things you are born to do, and other things you're not born to do. Anyhow, a couple of months ago, a homeless man hadn't eaten for 2 weeks straight and was begging me to give him some food or to make him something. He wasn't asking for money, but just something to eat. I decided to cook something, and people have always criticized how my lasagna tastes, which basically they say it tastes horrible, but I've become numb to the downward criticism of my food at this point. However, when I gave this homemade lasagna to that homeless guy, he absolutely loved it. I couldn't believe it. He said it tasted so nice, but when I gave it to a friend of mine, he didn't like it at all. Then I found another homeless man who hadn't eaten anything for 2 weeks, and I wanted to make him something. So I made him one of my homemade burgers. People have made some harsh comments about my burgers, and once, when I tried to do a barbecue for my friends and family, they all ordered takeout instead. This homeless man, though, he ate it straight away, and he was so grateful for it as well. He said there was nothing wrong with my burger, and it was absolutely amazing. A light bulb went off in my head. It's only when people haven't eaten for 2 weeks straight that they love my food. So I invited my friend over, and I tricked him into getting trapped to my cellar. I locked him inside, and I shouted through the door to him that after 2 weeks of eating nothing, he will love my food. He kept on yelling at me to let him go, and he was calling me crazy, but I kept telling him that I wasn't crazy, and that after 2 weeks, he's going to love my food. He's going to regret ever calling me the worst cook in the world. He's going to tell me that I was born to cook. Then, I had another idea. If people can only love my food after 2 weeks straight of not eating, then imagine how much more they would love it if they starved for 3 weeks. Or 4. The idea is just amazing, and I want my friend to absolutely love my food, so I may leave him down in my cellar for a month, maybe 2 months. He's gonna love my food after so many weeks of starvation. Marriage is supposed to be the union of two individuals who care for each other until the end of their lives. A couple of months ago, I went to a wedding, and we all took a large group photo. As time went by, each person who was in that photo went missing, and later found dead in some random place. I soon found that photo in my bedroom, with an X on some of the faces who have been found dead. An email was then sent to me by some stranger. It read,
I've married this photograph taken at a wedding, and when I marry a photograph, anyone in the photograph will also be married to me. I am in full control of this marriage, and I can do whatever I like when I am married to any photograph, and to whoever is in the photograph. I do not care about equal rights.
Then, as more time went by, I looked back at the wedding photo. Only I am left without an X across my face. Call me a nice guy all you want, but I just love helping people. I don't know, it just makes me feel good. The other day I helped an old woman cross the road. A few days before that I got a cat down from a tree. I help people carry their groceries, and it all makes me feel so good. Yesterday, I helped carry something heavy inside some white bag. I even used my own car to drive the person to the spot where it needed to be thrown out. Some canal. The white bag ripped and I saw a dead guy inside, all bloody and mangled. Went inside my trunk, grabbed a roll of duct tape, taped that bad boy shut. I helped the guy throw it in the canal. I love helping people. Me and my wife both speak different languages, and we never know what the other is trying to say. But I really like her voice. A couple of weeks ago, she came home with 2 chopped off cat heads, and she started speaking. I had no idea what she was saying, but her voice was so soothing. I smiled because she was smiling. Then, a couple days after, she came home with 2 chopped off goat heads. She started to speak again, and again, I had no idea what she was saying, but I enjoyed her voice. 2 days after that, she came home with 2 chopped off cow heads. She kept rambling on in her own language, and I was just going along, pretending to understand what she was saying. Yesterday, though, she came home with 2 human heads, 1 male, 1 female. She was going on, and I had no idea what she was saying, but I really like her voice. It's so soothing. Also, I think she just pretends to understand what I'm saying. You know, exactly what I do to her. I think we both have great sounding voices that soothe each other. My father died when I was 10 years old. He was just 30. I remember seeing him in his open coffin. He had some sort of license resting on his body. How did I know it was a license? Because on it read, "Licensed to be dead for 10 years. After everyone paid their final respects, he was finally buried. Well, I'm turning 20 soon. My mother's been ordering me to renew my father's license. With the help of my uncle, we dug up my father and opened up the coffin. He was all bones now, and I want to describe to you the other horrid details. I took the old license and replaced it with a new one. I had to get his fingerprints, or rather bone prints, on it. Just seeing my father just kind of stalled me for a moment. When the license ran out, his bones started to move. His skull turned toward me, and my uncle rushed in and grabbed a hold of my father's hands. He pressed every finger down onto the new license. The bones stopped moving. My father was dead again. In another 10 years, I'll have to do the same thing all over again. You have to be at least 18 years old to kill Larry. I couldn't believe it all at first. When I was 16, I got into a fight with a guy named Larry, and he was a man in his late 20s. I guess at the time he had every right to shout at me and my friends because we were causing a nuisance outside his house. I also had a gun on me. It was my father's, and I wanted to show it off to my friends. When Larry was shouting at me, I just shot him dead because I needed to act tough to my friends. But then he came back to life. He looked at me and simply said,
"You have to be at least 18 years old to kill me. And you need identification as well."
I tried shooting him again in the head, and then he just came right back to life.
"You need to be at least 18 years old to kill me. And before you kill me, you need to show identification."
My friends and I were in utter disbelief. We never heard of anything that required an age rating to kill anyone. Age ratings are usually for films, books, and foods. Then, when I was 17, I went to Larry's house. I had a fake ID which said I was 18. I knocked on Larry's door and showed him my fake ID. I then shot him in the head. He came right back to life and said,
"You're not 18. You have to be at least 18 to kill me. You had a fake ID."
I turn 18 next week. I'll be bringing my passport as proper proof of my age so I can finally kill Larry. Kieran can only date people who can walk through a gap between two walls down in his cellar. A girl named Sharon was so in love with Kieran, but when she tried to walk through the gap between the two walls in the cellar, she didn't fit. Sharon started sobbing, and Kieran also shed a few tears. Sharon became determined that she was going to fit between the gaps. She exercised and lost enough weight to finally be able to squeeze through the gap. Both Kieran and Sharon were overjoyed. They could date now, and eventually, they got married. Then, Sharon got pregnant. Kieran sadly had to tell her that he could only be with people who could fit through the two walls. Sharon cried and sobbed. She couldn't fit between the gap anymore because of her pregnancy. Unfortunately, it was way past the date when she could abort. Sharon disappeared for a couple of days. When she came back, her clothes were full of blood. Pregnant belly? Gone. She could fit through the gap between the walls again. She can now remain in a relationship with Kieran. I know that I am attractive, and as shallow and selfish that sounds, it's the truth. You may think being attractive is great, but to me, it's hell. Right now, most of you are scoffing at me in disgust for that comment, but even attractive people have struggles in daily life, just like everyone else. Life always gives complications to everyone, no matter who they are. I'll give you a few examples. A couple of months ago, I was walking down the street when I noticed a woman was coming towards me. It was like she was being dragged by an invisible person. It was the magnetic field of my attractiveness, and she soon became stuck to my body. She was screaming and she was in pain, and as I tried to force her off of me, a load of her skin on her face came off. I could see the skull in her head, and she was dead within seconds. Blood was everywhere. Another time was when I was sitting outside in the garden on a hot summer's day. All of a sudden, my attractiveness dragged a man through the fences, and he was soon stuck to my body. He was in pain, and when I pulled him off, his face was stuck to me. I had to remove it piece by piece. It was disgusting. There was human matter everywhere. I also had to buy a new fence. Recently, though, I think I might be losing my attractiveness. Fewer and fewer people are being stuck to me. And the ones that are stuck, it's easier to get them off. Easier. Life will be easier. As a joke, I fixed the doorbell on the inside of my front door instead of the outside. My wife didn't see the humor, but my kids had a good laugh about it. When I closed the door, my youngest child pressed the doorbell. As she pressed the doorbell, someone on the outside opened the door, even though it was fully locked. We were all shocked. "Hello," the person said. "Can I help you?" "Why did you ring the doorbell?" We couldn't answer. We were so surprised this was happening. Was this really happening? I don't like pranksters, so stop ringing the doorbell. I then put more doorbells inside my bedroom door and did the same for my children's bedrooms. On the inside. When I pressed the doorbell on my bedroom door, the same stranger opened the door as if it was his house. And he shouted at me, "You again! Stop pressing the doorbell!" My kids also pressed their doorbells, and the same thing happened to them. I'll be honest, my kids were enjoying it a bit too much. They'd constantly press the doorbell, and the stranger would open up, and he got angrier and angrier each time. Whenever this stranger closed the door, I'd open it, and he'd be nowhere. I made a necklace doorbell for my eldest child. She loved it. She put it around her neck. One day my youngest child pressed that doorbell. The same stranger opened up her chest like it was a door. "Right," he said. "That's it. I've had it." He grabbed my youngest child and took her with him as he closed my eldest child's chest. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. I've been trying to ring every doorbell, but this stranger is not answering anymore. My eldest child told me she could feel her sister banging against her chest inside her own body. I pressed my hand to her chest. I felt it as well. And I heard her scream. A faint scream. What have I done? I was just walking on my own when a stranger came up to me with a coin in his hand. "Heads or tails?" he asked, and me, being a sociable guy, I accepted the challenge. I asked him what I would win if I got it right, and he told me that he would buy me a chocolate bar. Okay. I called it heads, and the guy flipped the coin into the air, and as it spun in the air, the coin suddenly disappeared. Then a second later, an actual decapitated head landed onto the ground. Now, blood was still coming out of the head, and it was real as anything. "Well done," the stranger said. "You've won a chocolate bar." As he pulled the chocolate bar out of his back pocket, he asked me if I wanted to play again. "If you win," he said, "I'll give you another chocolate bar." I got the hell out of there as soon as I could. A week passed by and I couldn't stop thinking about the guy. I saw him on the road asking people if they wanted to play heads or tails, but everyone rejected him. I had to know if what happened on that street really happened. So I went up to him. I told him I wanted to play again. The prize this time was actual money, $100. He flicked the coin up in the air and we both stared at it as it spun. I called heads and he called tails. The coin disappeared. Then another decapitated bloody head fell to the ground. Not just any decapitated head, but my father's head. I could hear my mother screaming from our house up the road. And the other guy just gave me $100. I have no idea how to explain any of this. I've been suffering from migraines all my life. No medications have ever worked, apart from the loud cries from babies. From a young age, I've noticed that a crying infant somehow took away my migraines. Always looked like a creep, always sneaking up next to a mother with her crying baby. But I got really good at it. YouTube has also been a lifesaver, and the countless videos of crying babies have saved me. Recently, though, I went on holiday and I can't come back due to restrictions. The Wi-Fi has been cut for some reason, and my migraines are killing me. Not just the Wi-Fi, but I can't seem to get any kind of signal on my phone or any computer. There is a family, though, with a baby, but it isn't crying. I don't have a choice. I'm going to have to make that baby cry. My migraines are giving me so much hell. I don't have a choice. The sorry man likes to say sorry to people. The sorry man likes to hurt people so that he can say sorry to them. If the sorry man does something to you, do not accept his apologies. If you do accept his apologies, then you're feeding him his drug. I wish I knew this at first. I met the sorry man when he messed up my front lawn. He drove up on it, backed up, drove forward again, tore up my yard. I went outside and the sorry man started to apologize. He even gave me money to fix it. I accepted his apology. When I accepted his apology, he gave me a weird smile. He then came back another day and crashed into my car. He apologized profusely. He gave me some more cash, and I accepted his apology. Had my car fixed. His smile when he apologized became even more menacing. He then started to throw stuff at my home. Eggs, bricks, rocks. I went outside to confront him. As I was punching him, he just kept saying sorry. He started to cry. He offered me more money, but I didn't care about the money anymore. It was like he was buying apologies. Shortly after, I came home and found out that my house had burnt down with my family inside. The sorry man is still trying to apologize to me, but I'm not accepting his apologies anymore. I will not feed him what he wants. I have a teacher at school who teaches a variety of subjects, and he's generally well liked. The only strange thing about him is that he doesn't call any student by their real name, but by their future potential. One morning he came into class and started doing the register. "Potential murderer!" he shouted, and Callum raised his hand because he knows it's him because the teacher always calls him that name. "Potential burglar!" Brian puts his hand up because he's been called that many times. "Potential psychopath!" Emily raises her hand. "Potential cannibal!" And I now raise my hand because he always calls me that. He has something for everyone, from potential freak accident to potential evil genius. I admit, it was fun at first, but now I just want him to call me by my real name, Joshua. On another day, our teacher started doing the register, and as usual, he calls everyone by their potential and not their real names. But then he calls Callum by his real name. We were all shocked. At lunch, I asked Callum why our teacher didn't call him by potential murderer anymore. Callum told me he's not a potential murderer anymore. It's real. Callum actually murdered someone. He murdered some homeless man because he knew it would make the teacher call him by his real name. Callum then told me to take a bite out of the dead man, as it's the only way to make the teacher call me by my real name. So later that afternoon, we found the corpse, and I dug a chunk out of the dead guy and ate him. The next day, my teacher called me Joshua. I'm a photographer, and I usually make my money from taking pictures at weddings. It wasn't what I intended to do as a photographer, because I wanted to take pictures of poverty and warfare around the world, but dreams don't always come true. I hate weddings, but since I'm so good at taking photos of them, it's the only way I can make money. While I was taking photos at this one wedding, the job became so familiar to me that I wasn't checking my camera to see if the photos were coming out all right. Eventually, I did recheck them, and to my horror, each one I took was smudged, distorted, just plain terrible. I couldn't understand what was wrong with the camera. The photos of all the faces of all the people, they were all smudged and distorted. My camera couldn't even take a proper picture of the bodies of these people, like their arms and their legs. They weren't even showing up in the pictures. I was in big trouble. I had effectively destroyed the memories of this wedding because, let's face it, photos are a key part of every wedding. I was mortified. I had no idea what I was going to do. So, I kept on taking pictures, even though I had a faulty camera. I just couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go up to the bride and tell her the bad news. And that's when I noticed that my camera wasn't faulty. Every person's face was smudged and distorted, just like their pictures. Some people were missing both legs, some were missing arms, and some only had their heads floating around. I was glad my camera wasn't faulty. My wife keeps on making me sandwiches for some odd reason. The house is just full of sandwiches, and I don't expect her to ever make me anything else. As soon as we got married, all she has ever done is make me sandwich after sandwich. We still don't have kids because she just keeps on making me sandwiches. I have spent so much money on bread and ingredients, and I've talked to her about this. I've told her, you don't have to make me this many sandwiches. To help her, I decided to stop buying bread and mayo and meat so she doesn't make me anymore. When I came home from work that day, I saw she managed to get her own bread. The bread belonged to our next door neighbors, and the ingredients she used to make sandwiches, they were our neighbor's fingers, eyes, teeth, and brain matter. Those sandwiches were so bloody. Fuck using caskets or coffins to bury the dead, because when my uncle died, I laid him out for everyone to see. I laid him out in front of my house, and everyone saw my dead uncle on my front lawn. I put up a sign that read, "Here's my uncle who is now dead." A man like him wouldn't want a coffin to be buried in, but he would want to be shown off to the world and advertised to everyone. I even carried him on my shoulders and walked around shouting, "Here's my dead uncle who used to hide in trees to scare children. The man who used to bite cats' heads off. The man who used to go around trying to break into people's houses to sell them their own house." I then put my dead uncle on top of my car and drove around the area. He was rotting at this point, and the smell stretched out for miles. Children could see him, and the faint of heart could feel him. I shouted from my car, "Here's my uncle who is now dead and purposefully had more children than he could handle so he could watch them all fail at life. Here's my dead uncle who used to urinate on the old and have fights with men, women, and children, and small pets." I'm not going to put my uncle in a coffin, no. He's going to be carried around till he's just bones. I want everyone to know that my uncle is dead, and that he isn't stabbing people anymore. Here's my dead uncle who used to turn into a flesh-eating monster on every full moon and then try to make people better by making them into like him. He always bit them too hard and eventually just started eating them. This is the type of funeral I've given my uncle, and not the normal one where, he's all docile and in a coffin in some depressing room. This type of funeral is where everyone can see his dead body from all around. Even blind people can see him. Everyone gets to smell him, gets to taste him by licking him and touch him as proof that he's dead. And now that he's rotting away, I'll leave him somewhere on some land to feed the earth as repentance for all the bad deeds he did while he was alive. My son and I were walking to a forest for a day out. All of a sudden, we fell into a ditch. It was covered by boards, but it cracked when we walked on it. It was so random, and it was definitely something that doesn't happen in England every day. At first, the hole was steep, but then it turned into a slide which eased our fall. Our cushiony backpacks also softened the blow. Luckily, we didn't have any broken bones. My son and I could walk up the slope just a little bit, but at its steepest, it was impossible to climb. Our future looked helpless. Then a rope came down. I looked up and thanked whoever gave us the rope. I didn't see anybody, just the rope. I tied it around my son's waist. I watched as my little boy was lifted up. A sigh of relief came over me. Now my son's future became bright again. I was so happy, so relieved. I couldn't see who the stranger was who was lifting my son up, but I just kept saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Then my son screamed. I couldn't see him anymore. I shouted at the stranger, and then the rope came back down for me. I tied the rope around my body, started climbing up the ditch. The rope. It felt weird. It was wet. Clammy. It started to become more clear. That this felt and looked more like a tongue. I pulled out my pocket knife and started slicing the rope. I mean, the tongue. The stranger, the creature, whatever, howled in pain as I cut through it. I fell back down onto the ditch. I could still hear the creature moan. It ate my son. Some stories have hooks. This story has a bloody good one. It's about love. Or at least, marriage. My marriage. At heart, it's your typical fish out of water story, but like I said, there's a hook. The hook's in the beginning, although it's really the tail end that's most moving. At least now, when our love's drying up. Understand, I'm a fisherman, and I caught my wife with another man. Well, I caught the man first. I used Craigslist, I suppose the details don't really matter. It's enough to know that by the time he was naked in the shed, it was too late for him to change his mind. He broke down easily. He wasn't particularly thick-skinned. That's where the hook came in, pushed through a fold of flesh on his back. He wasn't much in the size department, but I didn't intend for him to get hung up on it. Unfortunately, he kept trying to escape, so what choice did I have? Then he seemed quite insecure, so I pierced him with another steel hook just in case. Like I said, bloody good hook. After he stopped struggling, I took him down and dragged him to my boat. We went fishing. Hold on, though. I may need to backtrack a little, because you may be wondering how I even knew she was out there. The answer's simple. I'd already seen her swimming a few times. It was love at first sight. Like many couples nowadays, we met on the net. So back to when I was fishing. I was in my boat with the Craigslist man with the steel hooks in his back. I tied a thick rope to one of the hooks, placed the man onto a net, and pushed them both overboard. He splashed and choked, attracting a lot of attention. I waited for her call. It came. She sounded so near to me. When she swam just close enough to the Craigslist man in the water, I pulled in the net. And there she was, shining, mine to the gills, and writhing so enticingly. I took her ashore. I placed her in a water tank and told her she would be my wife. I screwed her shut. For days I watched her bang on the glass. Until one day it happened. The glass cracked. The tank broke open. And with the water she spilled onto the floor. Now here I am, watching my marriage fall apart. Her gills are barely stirring. Her face, dry and still. It's only her scaly tail that's still gently moving. I caught my wife with another man. I met her on the net. I thought our love would last forever, but now, listening to her shrieks, I realized I was catfished. I wanted to marry a siren. But this thing is nothing but a mermaid. I went up to Mr. Rogers with the determination to ask him something, and I knew that he wanted to be in silence while reading the newspaper. But I needed him to show me something. I wanted to ask Mr. Rogers how to ignore someone who is being abducted. You see, a couple of weeks ago I saw someone being abducted, and I really wanted to ignore the abduction, but I couldn't. It has affected me, and now I have come to Mr. Rogers to show me how to ignore someone who is being abducted. Mr. Rogers put his newspaper down and took me to a place where people get abducted all the time. As we both saw someone getting abducted, he told me to concentrate on the ducks in the pond. I observed the ducks just being themselves and flapping their wings while surrounding the female duck until it couldn't escape. I didn't notice the abduction at all. Then another time, I wanted to ask Mr. Rogers how to ignore someone who is committing suicide. A couple of days ago, I saw a man about to jump off a bridge, and I wanted to ignore it and just walk on, but I couldn't ignore it. It's been in my mind ever since. I wish I knew how to ignore someone who is on the road to committing suicide, but it's harder than it sounds. It takes a lot of guts to just ignore the suffering. So when I had disturbed Mr. Rogers once more, he took me to a place where suicide happens all the time. He told me to stare at a wall, and he told me to observe how patient the wall is, and how the wall is so good and perfect. Also, the wall doesn't care about what others think of it. As I was staring at the wall, I didn't care about what was going on in the background, like the shotgun sounds, or the chairs being flipped over when someone was hanging themselves. Then I went up to Mr. Rogers one last time. I wanted to ask him how to ignore someone who is being murdered. You see, I saw someone being murdered and I really wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. I then kept on asking Mr. Rogers to show me how to ignore someone who is being murdered or about to be murdered, but he wasn't paying me any attention at all. He was just staring at the newspaper, reading things that he'd already read before. Then, I realized that he was ignoring me now, and that I was being shown how to ignore someone who was going to be murdered. Mr. Rogers ignored me so well that I could hear growling noises inside the house, and Mr. Rogers is ignoring it all just by staring at his newspaper. I am terrible at hide and seek, and I can never find a good hiding spot. To compensate for my lack of talent for finding a good hiding spot, I make sure that they find me in unusual ways. A couple of months back, I was playing hide and seek with my friends, and even though we are all adults, I guess we still enjoy childish endeavors. We were all at this female friend's house, and there were 7 of us all together. I knew that I had found a bad hiding spot, but I decided to cut my hands and pour blood all over my body. This will remind the female friend of ours how her mother had been brutally murdered by her father, who then took his own life. You see, if people can find me very easily, then they will find me in ways that they could never imagine. When she found me, she looked horrified, and I could tell that it started reminding her of her past. Then, a couple of weeks later, there was a party in my work office, and everyone brought presents and food. They all decided to play hide and seek after an hour inside the office. This game just follows me wherever I go. I knew that the spot I hid in was a bad hiding spot, so I thought to myself that even though I was going to get caught very easily, I was going to make sure that I was going to be found in such a situation that it will traumatize whoever is doing the seeking. I decided to murder a couple of rats, cats, and birds that linger around the car park and place them next to me where I was hiding. The person who was doing the seeking was an animal lover of all kinds. I thought, when he finds me, he's going to regret finding me. See, this is what I do to compensate for being a bad hider, and to be honest, I enjoy doing it so very much. When the seeker found me, he straightaway couldn't believe what he had stumbled across. The look of horror and disgust in his eyes was present, and it was just priceless. Recently, I went to a married friend's birthday party for their 7-year-old child. Everyone in that party loves children, and hide and seek will be the main game. So, being the worst hider, I'm going to make sure that whoever finds me with a couple of dead children. I recently got a second-hand sofa. A nice dark brown leather, and real comfy. When I got it home, I tried it out in the lounge. The wife, kids, and dog all found it very comfortable. It suited our lounge just fine. It stood out from the rest of the furniture, but not in a tasteless way. No, this piece had a lot of charm about it. Anyway, one evening late after work, I dropped my keys down the side of it. Not wanting to arouse my wife and kids from sleep, I refused expressing too much frustration. I simply stuck my hand in the gap between the cushions and had a rummage. No dice. So what did I do next? Well, I removed the cushions entirely. Upon doing so, I found my keys, but I discovered something else. A peculiar piece of stitching on the seat. Whoever had done it had done a rookie job. I looked closer and saw that one of the stitches was tinged dark red. I went to the kitchen, grabbed some scissors, and snipped at the stitching. This would hardly destroy the sofa, I figured. However, when I cut the last piece, the string slid away from the seat to the floor, like some strange worm desperate to escape. The square flapped open, revealing quite a large black hole. Some silence. From the hole, there came a sloshy echo. It started off rather quiet, but gained volume quickly. My curiosity quickly became horror when I bent to see if anything was down there. At the bottom, afar it seemed, was a young boy on his tummy, as if asleep. I frowned, and he began to twitch. His arm moved, like he sensed I was watching. He rolled over, and I saw that it was my son. Except it wasn't my son at all. The boy's face was terribly beaten, and his eyes were pulsating. His nose twitched like a wolf's. He snarled and then rolled back to his original position. The shivers raced through my body as I scrambled to get the cushion back on. While doing so, I heard groans from the hole, a crooked voice saying, "Let me see the light. Let me see it." I drove the sofa to the woods and set fire to it. Then I sped home to check that my son was upstairs in his bed. And he was, in the exact same position he'd been in when I saw him down the hole. However, hearing the crackling of those nearby flames, I was too terrified to wake him up. In fact, I'm too terrified to look him in the eye ever again. I was born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina, with my parents Amy and Mark. Living at the beach has been great. I love it. But lately things have been pretty weird. I haven't told anyone because I'm scared. You see, I started receiving these texts. Of course, they're from an unknown number. I'm scared because these texts are picture messages that include pictures of me. Pictures of me doing things like hanging out with my friends, going to the library, things like that. A couple of nights ago, I got a message of me as if someone was standing outside my bedroom window. I looked outside as soon as I got it, and that's when I saw it. There was someone standing there that looked exactly like me, staring at me with an emotionless face. They didn't move. I was terrified. I knew I was hallucinating or something. My anxiety probably got the best of me. I forced myself to get in bed and act like nothing happened. Well, this is where it gets weirder. I went to school today and met up with my friends. My best friend Katie pulled me aside after a couple of minutes. She asked me if I was okay. I was confused. Yeah, why wouldn't I be okay? I told her. She looked at me as if she was annoyed. Well, she said, I mean, you were so upset last night when you came over out of nowhere. You told me about the texts you've been getting and how freaked out you were. I didn't know what to say. I was home all last night with my parents. That was not me. My degree in medicine is completely and utterly useless. I regret giving 10 years of my life in trying to become a doctor. I was 30 years old when I decided that I wanted to become a doctor, and I sacrificed everything, even my marriage. I feel resentful at everything. I trained and worked so hard to become a doctor, and I studied every single day. I am stuck. I have no idea where to go or what to do now. How did my life become like this? I wanted to save people's lives and actually make a difference in the world. I know how naive that sounds, but it's true. I wanted to study medicine to become a doctor. I first went to Jerome, who was going to teach me about the human body, and because Jerome was a serial killer, he knew the body inside and out. His victims screamed and cried, but when he killed them, he opened them up and showed me the organs. He did so many experiments on them, and I studied from him really closely. It was incredible. There were so many things that I didn't know about the human body up until that point. I was really grateful for Jerome. I also learned surgery from Jerome, and it was amazing. I learned about chemicals from a drug dealer who sold every kind of drug in the world. I studied really closely with him at that point. His name was Chris, and he knew his drugs and chemicals like he knew the back of his hands. It was so intriguing to see what each kind of drug did to the body. I was sure I was going to become a doctor. Jerome and Chris gave me degrees in medicine science. I found them online, and they teach other hopefuls who want to one day become doctors. When I got my degree in medicine, I went out to become a doctor. None of the hospitals wanted me. None of them took me seriously. So I'm going to have to prove it. Right now, I got a guy in my truck, and when I take him out of the truck and put him out in front of the hospital, I'm going to shoot him and then perform surgery on him. Then the hospital will have to employ me as a doctor because they'll have proof that I am capable. Up to now, my degree in medicine has been useless. My child is frightened of ghosts. I have been constantly helping my child to get over her fears, but it has been a struggle. The trials a child must go through in life, with all the fears, anxiety, and trepidation, must be daunting. As a responsible parent, I have been doing my best to show my daughter that ghosts do not exist. I have taken many steps to assure her this. I myself used to be scared of ghosts as a child, but my father helped me through it. I will do the same with my daughter. In our family, there is a tradition that we do when one member is scared of ghosts. I called all of the extended family and neighborhood friends to come to my house. The main event was going to be about my daughter realizing that ghosts do not exist. It was going to be nice for everyone to be together, as it had been a long time. My daughter was terrified and even more anxious as she was going to be the main attraction. However, I told her that after the event, she would no longer be scared of ghosts. Then, when the day arrived and all the guests gathered around the house, I had a man tied up to a chair. My daughter was next to him. The man tied up to the chair was killed, and as he died, I told my daughter, "Observe this man. Observe his dying body. Is there any spirit coming out of him?" My daughter just stared at him with her wide eyes. For hours, we all just stared at a dead body as we were all witnessing no kind of spirit coming from the man's body. This was a lesson for my daughter and a reminder to everyone else in the room that ghosts, spirits, whatever you call them, do not exist. Later, on another night, my daughter got scared again and killed our cat. She looked at me and said, "I just wanted to remind myself that ghosts and spirits do not exist." Welcome to Cozy Grove Summer Camp. We are all so very happy for you to be here. This is the best time to make new friends and explore the wonderful opportunities on the campgrounds. We assure you that you will have an excellent time as long as you follow our short list of rules. Rule number 1. All campers of Cozy Grove Summer Camp must turn in any and all personal belongings to their head counselor for inspection. Any items found breaking the inspection rules will be thrown in the Moore Lake. Rule number 2. Lights out is strictly at 9 o'clock. Despite what it might seem, it is indeed nighttime, and any outside lights peering through the windows should not be investigated. Rule number 3. Don't tease or bully your fellow cabin mates. Some of them might be hungry. Rule number 4. Do not bring food inside the cabin. It lets them know where you are. All meals should be eaten in the dining hall and litter at the picnic area cleaned appropriately. Rule number 5. We do not host late-night campfire sing-alongs or s'mores. Please quietly wake your cabin leader if you believe to hear singing or fire crackling after hours. They know how to handle this. Rule number 6. Doors should always be unlocked. However, windows should be locked. Unlocked doors will tell others it is empty inside, and nothing is able to enter anyways without you letting them in. Rule number 7. No swimming after dark, especially in Moore Lake. We take no liability for campers drowning, nor for them being dragged underwater via other means. Rule number 8. When visiting our lovely forest, please stay on the trail. Lost campers are a serious risk. We hold no responsibility for the mental and/or physical damage taken on by these campers, nor harm they might cause to others. Rule number 9. Never open the cabin door when you hear a knock or scream. Your cabin leaders have keys. Despite what it may seem like, nothing out there is your friend, despite what they might claim. Rule number 10. Green is safe, red is danger. Any campers or counselors found wearing red are expected to report to a safe adult. Please do not speak to them otherwise. Rule number 11. Always listen to your cabin leader or counselor. They know the grounds of Cozy Grove Camp better than anyone. Some may seem unpleasant at first, but we assure you that anyone wearing Cozy Grove's signature green jacket is safe. Rule number 12. Cozy Grove takes no responsibility for the mental or physical damage that may be taken by anyone who breaks these rules. We promise you, as long as you follow these rules, your time here will be safe and enjoyable. Rule number 13. Last but not least, have fun! Cozy Grove Camp welcomes all. To start with, the store I work at isn't Petco or PetSmart. It's a mom and pop one. I like my job all right. It can be mundane at times, but hey, the pay is decent and the hours are rarely ever unreasonable. The best part of my job is working with animals. Sure, having to clean their cages isn't the most pleasant thing in the world, but it's worth it to play with them every once in a while. However, I've noticed things recently that are disturbing. The owners left on Monday and have left me in charge until next week. Everything was going fine until I noticed something odd going on by the bird section. There was one more bird than there was before. I counted them. There should have been 14, but I counted 15. I checked to see if the extra bird was in our inventory. Sure enough, it was not. The extra bird was a cockatiel, and since we sell so many, I couldn't tell which one was the new one. I also didn't see how one could have possibly snuck in. My next thought was that maybe someone put it there. However, there are two reasons that is unlikely. One, you need a key to get into the display case, and two, there's a rescue center up the street, of which most of the pets we sell come from. If the person wanted to drop their bird off, why didn't they just take it there instead of going through all this trouble to sneak it into the store? I called the owners and explained what I'd found. They told me to double check if it was indeed true, and that we might have overlooked the extra bird. If I confirmed there was an extra bird, I was to add it to our inventory. I double checked to find that there were only 14 cockatiels. I recounted 2 times just to make sure. I decided that I'd been under a lot of stress. I must have imagined the other bird there. I soon closed the shop and headed home. The next day, things once again started normally. Nothing seemed weird until I went by the aquatics section. There was one more goldfish than before. This isn't unusual as they tend to breed, but this extra one was fully grown. Needless to say, I was starting to get freaked out. Once again, I explained what I found to the owners and they told me to double check. I did. And like the extra bird, I no longer saw an extra fish. It was at this point I considered the possibility I was going crazy, or that I had some form of schizophrenia I didn't know about. I decided that if I noticed anything similar, I would start recording it. The store doesn't have security cams since we live in a relatively crime-free area, but I did have some cameras at home. I could use them to record footage in the store. They were old cameras, so the footage wasn't HD or anything like that. However, the footage they picked up was clear enough to make out. The next day, I noticed we had an extra snake in our reptile section. I had the camera in my car in case something like this occurred again. Luckily, I had enough for each section. I made sure to strategically place them in ways where they wouldn't be noticed easily, hiding them behind items on the shelf and things like that. The only difficult thing was making sure the lenses were not obscured. So I hid the cameras after I made sure everything else I needed to do for closing was taken care of. Before I left, I went by the reptile section again and saw there was one less snake than before. Now, I don't mean that the extra snake had gone away. I mean that there was one less than what I thought we originally had. They were kept in separate cases, so it wasn't like they could kill and eat each other. The weird feeling I had before began to turn into worry. I started to feel like I was in danger. From what exactly? I didn't know at the time. The following day, I arrived earlier than usual to collect the cameras I had hidden. When I stepped inside, I was met with a grisly sight. By the cats' cages. The cats. They'd all been slaughtered. Well, shredded, really. Bits of their flesh clung to the doors of their cages, and a trail of blood in the shape of cat paws led to the hamster section. I already knew what I'd see there. The only thing left of the hamsters was one half-eaten head. The poor thing looked terrified. I stepped out to puke. I called the police afterwards. Then I went back inside to collect the cameras. I had to see what they recorded. I got in my car, locked it, and cranked it up. If I needed to flee, all I had to do was put the car in drive and I'd be out of there. The cops said that they'd be over as quickly as possible to make sure I was somewhere safe. Since I was, I figured I could glance over the footage that my cameras recorded. I started with the cat and hamster footage. First, the cat cages. It started with me making sure the camera was in place. I sped it up a bit, and for 3 hours, nothing was out of place. However, on hour 4, I caught a glimpse of something. Another cat. A gray tabby walked into the frame. It looked at the cats in their cages. Instantly, the cats got agitated. Their fur bristled and they hissed at the new cat. Now here's where things get really messed up. The cats' cages are in their own separate room that we make sure to lock every night. The new cat seemed to be searching for a way inside. I thought it wouldn't find one. I saw it do something that made my heart stop. It started to stretch itself thin. I didn't fully comprehend what I was seeing at first. However, I eventually realized that the cat was stretching itself thin, like taffy. When it had gotten thin enough, it flopped on its side. It then slid under the crack of the door. Now, the cats had gotten even more agitated than before. That thing stretched its head and squeezed it into the nearest cage. I could hear a pained scream from the cat inside, followed by silence. And then what sounded like meat being ground. The thing masquerading as a cat pulled its head out of the cage. It looked like a normal cat again. But its face was covered in blood. It licked its lips. The other cats met the same fate as the previous one. Finally, that thing squeezed back under the door to get out of the room. Soon, it left the frame. I immediately went to the footage of the hamster section. The same cat wandered onto the frame and the hamsters reacted the same way the cats had. This time, the thing began to shrink down, and the shape of its ears changed. Soon, I was looking at a hamster. It squeezed into the hamster's cases. Those hamsters, they met the same fate as the cats. By this point, I felt faint. I would have left the parking lot if it weren't for the police arriving moments later. One commented on how pale I looked and asked if I needed a doctor. I told him that I'd be fine, but that I was in a little shock. They took my statement. I didn't bother mentioning the thing because I figured they wouldn't believe me. I just told them that it was vitally important they view the footage on my cameras. I was going to leave, but then I remembered something. I had hidden cameras to view the back and front entrances of the store, just in case it was someone sneaking in. I'd completely forgotten about them in the midst of everything. I know I should have given them to the police, but I was so exhausted. I went home instead. After I calmed down a bit, I took a look at the footage on the 2 cameras. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't go to the police right away. The back entrance footage didn't show anything. The front entrance footage, however, did, and even though what I saw was less gory, it scared me far more than what I had seen before. Someone walked into the frame. It turned out to be me. Or should I say, the thing that was posing at me, looked directly at the camera. Its eyes looked like mine, except that they had this gleeful glint to them. What disturbed me the most about it was its smile. It looked like it had layers of teeth. Even with the low quality of the camera, I could see it had 3 extra layers of teeth. Now, I'm wondering if I should turn this footage into the police. I know they should believe me. I mean, they viewed the footage on the other cameras, but what if they just think that I messed with the footage? And since it technically shows me as the only person at the store during the time, there may be a chance that everything that's happened could be pinned on me somehow. So, should I give it to them? What's gotten me even more worried, though, is what the thing did before walking off frame. It spoke. It just said 2 words to the camera. You're next.